Paul, I'd like to get you to jump into this discussion, especially around this argument around taxation potentially being the solution to inequality within a capitalist system. In Europe and in the US, it's a big political debate. Much closer on the continent, you know, the tax base is so small, and you have a lot of politicians facing serious consequences for increasing tax. What's your take on this particular model?
Thank you. Taxation can be used to redistribute income as a policy instrument for distributing income. However, we should be careful not to skip for the good effects of capitalism. Capitalism is not wholly bad, like the professor said, and my friend from Enterprise Uganda said. Capitalism has been responsible for flow of finances, for diffusion of innovations, and for growth, which is important for reducing income inequality. However, a lot of the flow of finances, particularly in the developing world, has been quick finance or volatile finance, which caused the financial crisis in 2009. Capitalism has also been responsible for power of multinational companies and individuals who sometimes, what Professor pointed out, control government and control policy to their favor. So those kind of firms should be taxed. But again, the tax policy should not be so generous, like the Ugandan tax policy, corporate tax policy is so generous that the statutory rate is at 30%. But if you calculate the deductions given to the companies, the deductions for dividends, the deductions for interest, the deductions for debt, the deductions for interest payments, if you have debt, companies end up paying about 3 or 4% of their turnover, and some companies have tax holidays which are almost indefinite. Deductions for debt are indefinite. Such rules attract investments, but they attract investment which is predatory. So we should design our tax policy that we encourage businesses to grow, but also to distribute income. Capitalism again has led to a restructuring of the economy, and that has caused a lot of pain, where the West has moved from manufacturing to the service industry, and there's growth of manufacturing in the least developing countries. And such restructuring of an economy, such a big shock to the economy, has some losers and some winners. Capitalism has also led to excess supply, a glut of supply in the industries, particularly in the car industry, where we're producing more cars than we can use. And eventually, these funds will need to match, and jobs will be lost. And so we need to come up with a taxation policy which address such issues. Capitalism has also led to growth of high-tech manufacturing industries in the West, which has led to deindustrialization, a topic Ramadan is very passionate about. This is deindustrialization in Africa. Our farms, our manufacturing farms are not competitive anymore. So we could use positive taxation to address such issues, because when we deindustrialize, we lose jobs, and in a country where we have a large youth population, that is a threat not only to the economy but to the security of the country. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Professor Surum, I'd just like you to respond to two issues that have come up both from Ramadan and from Paul. One, the issue of what Uganda's economic model looks like. So you have the argument from Paul coming in that our corporate tax policy is very predatory. Ramadan argues against, the lending sector. Kenya, for example, recently introduced a lending cap to limit the interest rates at which banks can give out loans to the public. Whereas in Uganda, the lending cap is really determined by the market. So I'd just like you to respond to some of these two issues and also weigh in on whether Uganda's model right now is the right model, or should we be thinking about a new model?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy with your questions. When we became an independent country, the world was, Cold War was in progress, and we were being very careful to decide which side we are on, whether we are for capitalism or communism. It was a very serious problem. And we said that we adopt a mixed economy, whatever that meant. In practice, we agreed with what the World Bank told us to do, but also we adopted some elements of planning, 5-year plans, and we created some public enterprises. This is how we understood being non-aligned, so to speak, neither capitalism nor communism. Later, our economy broke down in the 70s. In the 80s, when the current government came in and the total economic fabric had broken down, we had to decide what to do. The only people who came up with money to help us were the West, specifically the World Bank and IMF. But it came with a price. We had to sell off the public enterprises, like Uganda Commercial Bank, which I headed at one time. I fought to stop the privatization of the bank, and I was defeated. I was actually dismissed. So Ramathan is right that the financial sector of Uganda is defective and needs to be changed so that it serves the interests of all the people. The obvious defection is the inclusivity or lack of inclusiveness of that system. When we were reforming that sector in the 80s and 90s, some of the conditionalities said that once you liberalize the banks, they will spread to the rural areas. When I became Minister of Finance in 2005, 20 years later, I found that there has been the commercial banks have not gone to the rural areas. And that's why we started savings and credit cooperatives as one way of increasing access to financial services by the rural people. And that was fought. And regulations which have come along with that were not passed. And so many of these cooperatives failed because they were not regulated, which was most unfortunate. I think the law was finally passed 2 years ago, very late. So we still need to include the rural sector in the financial sector. More inclusivity is required so that people have access to financial services, so that they can save, they have access to credit. Admittedly, one of the theories of microfinance was that the government would provide the finances to rural people. This is a foolish assumption and dangerous model. People have to save themselves and access credit through their own institutions. So I agree with Ramathan. I don't agree with him entirely when he says the Bankers Association meet so that they can do business as a curtail I think that's not true. I was chairman of the Bank Association at one time, and I can assure you that we did not pass such rules or decisions. It's more of an association, more of a club of people in the same business than a curtail. Maybe there's another bank association I'm not aware of, but this is the one that I know does not work that way. The question of the model, economic model, is critical. Now we are no longer living in a world where the conflict or confrontation between the West and the East was as severe as it was during the Cold War. The conflict between Russia and America was putting us on edge. We were like in a state of constant fear of coups were being made, depending on which side you were. It was a very dangerous environment in the 60s and 70s, and maybe 80s. Now, I think there's more opportunity to forge an economic system that comprises of various elements of China and the US. After all, China and the US are now economic partners, though they may have their tensions, but they're working together. The one is communist and the other is socialist. Of course, when I go to China, they tell me we are operating a market system, and I say, wow, that's amazing. But Uganda, I believe, needs to synthesize more carefully the benefits of markets and the benefits of planning, including micro-planning, not merely planning on a big scale, but planning on production of commodities such as coffee or cotton or maize, on a plan, serious planning, including the involvement of households, so that they can rise faster in their income. So I agree with him entirely that our work for designing a new economic system is overdue. We've been learning what we could, but we need to move faster. And I think it's not a question of capitalism or socialism, but what is right and what can work, what has worked in India and China and elsewhere, and USA, and synthesize this into a new system for Africa and for Uganda, East Africa, and the rest of Africa. Thank you.
Life, as we know, is all about happiness. One word, happiness. That's life satisfaction, and the happiness is usually derived from three major things. From the freedom of choice, the freedom to choose, which is quite wide and diverse, choosing everything, choosing, like when we are here, when we part, we are going to go and have dinner. Are we going to choose the dinner to have, or some people the dinner chooses them? That's one. Secondly, life is also about self-esteem, who you are. And to me, I think that's very, very critical for someone to feel that you're living a complete life. And ultimately, life is also about the material things which money buys. So income is quite critical. However, when you look at what research, what empirics show, you'll find that 73% of the global population today believe that being financially well off is the most important thing, or the most important determinant of happiness, compared to about 40% of the population that lived in 1960. That means we are becoming increasingly more money-oriented as time goes on. And recently, the Gallup asked the millennials what they thought was more critical for their lives. Only 40% thought that developing a meaningful philosophy of life is as important as money. So you can see that we have top-scrubbed the facts that in 1960, our parents believed that money was not the most important. It was only 40% that believed money was important. Today, it is 73%. Then they used to think that, developing a meaningful philosophy of life was more important. And yet the average real income, which research has found that you could make people happy, has remained at around $12,000 per person a year, on average, which, for example, in Uganda translates to about 40 million shillings. And it is in line with the sterling paradox, that money is important in our lives up to an extent, after which, after a certain amount of money, then any more increments you have in income might not determine your life so, as important as that $12,000 and below is. So on average, if somebody could earn 40 million shillings in Uganda a year, would be the happiest person. Those who are above 40 million, they have more money, but doesn't bring happiness to them. Those who are below 40 million, definitely will not be happy as well.
So that's about 8 million, 7 to 8 million a month.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and just a follow-up question as you're responding is how has capitalism affected this change or this trend in the dynamics you're speaking of?
Of course, we are no longer very satisfied with what we have. Capitalism is about accumulation. The genius of capitalism is production, is the accumulation of more wealth. It's not about distribution, not about sharing. It's not about the things which money can't buy. The neoliberal kind of dispensation which we tend to worship has definitely contributed to this, because everybody today, if you asked every younger person, would want to become a Mark Zuckerberg, or even a Bill Gates, or in Ugandan case, every young person would want to become a ham. So we tend to worship money, those with money, and we think they are more. Very few will tell you, I want to be like that professor, when you don't have money. So the failure to lead happy lives free of money worries has ceased to be the guiding principle of life as time goes on. And definitely capitalism has everything to do with this. That addiction to shopping, addiction to having as much money as your neighbor would be having. As you know, happiness is relative. It's about relative income, not absolute income. And even if you get a lot of money, if your neighbors have more than you, or the people whom you are reading or watching on TV, like we have seen some of them in the videos here, the inequalities rising, that reduces the relative happiness of people with lower incomes.
Thank you. Carol, I'd like you to weigh in on this, especially because it's interesting that you're specialized in a field that has very much been described as the epitome of capitalism. Sports, whether you're looking at the NFL, football, rugby, the Olympics. What's your take on this particular question?
So your question is money indeed ruling our world?
Yes.
Okay, so the answer is yes. Thank you very much. Actually, more seriously, if we take a step back and we want to have a very global perspective, maybe we can ask ourselves, what is ruling our world? And the answer, there is a lot of literature about this and about power. And actually, when you think about this in the history, there is several types of power. Joseph and I explained it quite well, especially with hard power and soft power. The hard power was military reason, but also it was economical reason. So we had a lot of theory, a lot of development about how economy is important and about how capitalism is important, and also other type of approach. But today, in sport, but in society in general, we see something changing, evolving, because the situation today is not at all the same than a few decades ago, and you said it pretty well. So considering corruption, considering the rise of inequalities between cities and between countries, between north and south, we can think that something is really evolving, and we have to be very, very focused on this change. It's not because capitalism is very roots in our society and our lives today that means that it will last forever. And what is quite interesting in our society is how can this change could happen. A lot of NGOs working on this and working on why money is so important for us and why there is still inequality. But there is also individuals, there is also international organization. Okay, so the tons of money, the amount of money has to be very used carefully. And for example, we have United Nations, we have WTO, we have mondial and regional organizations say, okay, so we have to change, and today we have to say that if money ruled our lives previously, maybe it won't be the case in 10 months, 10 years, in 1 century. So that's why it's quite interesting to see this moment as a crossroad. We have to make choice, we have to think about the changement, and we have to answer to this question. Is money is ruling our lives? And if we want that it will be the case in a few months and in the very close future.
Thank you. Dr. Suruma, you've had an interesting career where you've been at the center of decisions affecting money, especially in Uganda, whether at the central bank or as Minister of Finance. In your opinion, are we failing to curtail the negative effects of capitalism in a globalized world? The world is recovering from an economic recession. A lot of economists are predicting another slowdown. So, are we failing, and what's the problem?
Thank you very much. Before I became minister in the central bank, I was a professor of economics. And I used to teach students that money is defined as a medium of exchange. I think it still is essentially a medium of exchange. Some think that it's born in capitalism, markets, where it's important to exchange goods and services. And so we teach the students that money does not have intrinsic value. You don't go for it for its own sake, but because it can enable you to do other things, acquire goods, services, and so on. Now, is it ruling our lives? We have, in Uganda, we have a large so-called informal sector, in which money is relatively a small percentage of people's incomes. They have this subsistence production, a small proportion of that is sold to get things that you cannot produce at home. But otherwise, people depend on their own production. So definitely, I would say that money is not dominating their lives. It will be dominating their thoughts, but I don't think it's dominating their lives. They're probably more worried about their gardens. And of course, when they need to send their children to school, buy clothing and so on, money is increasing. They are increasingly conscious of the need for money and the importance of money. At the center, what you may call the formal sector, then perhaps we are much closer to the Western capitalist countries, where income is monetary, and we use it to do just about everything we want. Now the issue of whether money is ruling the world or ruling our lives, I think it should be taken seriously, because those who have money have influence. And I remember in the old days when I was here at Makerere as a lecturer, a senior lecturer, and we started organizing politics, we had to get the assistance of businessmen to assist us in organizing our politics. We had to ally with business, so the intellectuals had to ally with businessmen in order to get moving. We had to move to Jinja and Masakar and other places, and we needed vehicles. So we needed business people to give us money with which to organize our politics. What point am I making? That politics, government, certainly, has a huge impact on our lives. We call them rulers sometimes, people in government. And to the extent that they rely on people who have money, or access to money, to organize the politics, which then has a large impact on the people, keeping the government in power, then money has a great deal of impact on our lives. However, I want to, before I stop, I want to make a proviso that we don't want to despair that poor people cannot change the world. They can, but it's the hard way. Fighting money and fighting power is hard work and dangerous work. So things can be changed. And of course the problem is that then those who are out come in, and now they start accumulating money they don't want to get out. So it becomes a never-growing problem, but the impact of money cannot be denied, in my opinion. The issue of unbridled capitalism, I don't know if that still exists. I want to think that capitalism is somehow contained with some unbridled, meaning totally ungoverned, unregulated. I hope we don't still have that, but we can debate that as well.
But Professor, there's still the question about the negative implications that have come out of capitalism. One of the biggest being the issue of inequality, and there's a question about whether globally or even within governments, there are enough policies that are being put in place to manage these negative effects.
The general approach is that as a country we are very poor. In your what you sent out in the flyer, you said about 25 billion in GDP, US dollars, for Uganda against Apple's 60 billion in income. So our view, and I think the view of most people, is that what we need most is growth. Hopefully equitable growth, in the sense that, say, the subsistence farmers would be enabled to have higher productivity of coffee or cotton or whatever they grow, and have higher income. So there are a few people who are rich, yes, but in my view, that's not the problem. I think the problem is how we can have a much higher GDP. We are dealing with the Hunan province recently, which is smaller than Uganda, and has a GDP of 600 billion. Although they have more population, they have 70 million, we have 40, but still you can see that proportionally they have far more GDP than we have. And we need to find ways of increasing the incomes of our households and productivity of our households as a way of solving the economic problem. I don't think it's being created by capitalism, in my opinion. I think it is created by low productivity, low technology, and yes, relatively poor economic organization, which needs to be improved.
Thank you. Ronald, I'd like to challenge you to respond to what Professor Suruma has said, because his argument is that what we need is a higher GDP. If you look at a country like India, the GDP has been increasing over the years. They have one of the highest rates of billionaires coming up, but also one of the highest rates of inequality. And also, Professor argues that this is not necessarily created by capitalism. Do you have a response to Professor? And if there is a problem with capitalism, are we seeing an end to capitalism? And are there new models that can be explored?
Yeah, thank you. I think the way I look at it, and I would say as Africa, we are coming to the party a bit late. And I don't know whether we want the party to end. Because if you see what capitalism has done for Europe and what it has done for the United States, it's amazing. And I mean, to some extent, what it is actually doing for China now. It's amazing what is possible if you find individuals who are pursuing profit, and they are creating jobs, and they are creating opportunities for others. They are putting together factories. And I think, in my opinion, the way I look at it, it is, we still don't have enough capitalists. I think as a country, we need more of them, not less. We need more people putting up these factories. We need more people creating the homes in which people will live. And I think in light of that, we need to appreciate the possibilities that capitalism has. Do we need to put some kind of limitation? I think, as Professor rightly said, there is a clear sense now that if we learn from the people who are ahead of us, they say that, you know what, I think if it's employment, you shouldn't employ everyone. If you have a 7-year-old child, he shouldn't find a job. He should be in school. That is something which we didn't decide on, but we learned from the people who went ahead of us using capitalism. So I think, in my opinion, we need to make sure that we draw on the benefits. I have the privilege of working with small and medium enterprises. And I think the challenge which exists as a country, it is, if you were to put up a potassium factory in this country, which Ugandan do you talk to? And if there is no Ugandan you talk to, the question is why? Is it because he lacks the money? Is it because he lacks the expertise? And I think what the government needs to be doing more is, how do you actually create more capitalists who can be able to pursue these opportunities and give them an environment to be able to enjoy their profits and create more opportunities for others. I think when the question of inequality is an interesting one. Because if you are in and I'll use a story to allude, if you are in a village and the richest person has a cow and the rest have chicken, equality is possibly making sure that the richest person also gets chicken. If his cow dies and it has chicken, then we have kind of become more equal in the world, in the village. But the question is there a benefit in me, for me as one of the poor people, to find the rich person with 20 cows? Is there a benefit? Will I be able to buy more milk from him? And that means that even my children who are not having milk can actually buy the milk. Because if he has 20 cows, he can produce more milk. But he's going to be much richer than I am. But I think, for me, the benefit is that if he has 20 cows, that means he can't only feed his family with milk, he can feed everyone with milk. He possibly may give me a job. Instead of working on my garden, which is producing very little, I could work in his cow, with his cows, to be able to clean them and make sure they produce more. So that means that I may have a benefit. However, it is a bit difficult to articulate, because if you say that, let me say as a government, the government encourages the man to have 20 cows, in a way it's leaving me behind. And if it's leaving me behind, say, why are you encouraging him and not encouraging me? So I think that's where the big debate is. But I believe that there are clear benefits, and I think coming in last to the party, we see what capitalism has done for others. We want capitalists who can build railroads. I mean, we are currently building a railroad from Mombasa. The question is, where the canal is. We want also our steel industry to come up, and we have names like Mukwasi or Musoke who own that industry, and they are able to build it. And I think those possibilities should be there. And I believe the focus should be, how do we create capitalists who have a heart for the people enough to be able to create the jobs, but also enjoy the benefits of their products.
But Ronald, the question is that also with this model, the gap between the rich and the poor is increasing. How does this model address that problem? And if not, what alternative models are there?
I tend to think the gap between the rich and the poor will increase, at least in the short term. Because you look at us as a country, if you go to any average district and you ask, I want someone to put up capital of $1 million, they possibly don't exist. However, if you get a person who puts up $1 million in that district, the gap is going to be very massive in the short term until we are able to also have other people come up and possibly get jobs and do that. So in my opinion, I think what we need is a way, and I think a way that can lift the whole society. I believe that things like education, things like a proper justice system, absolutely important in the short term to make sure that you're equalizing. But the effort shouldn't be, and I think as Professor Reddy put it, the effort should be that we are growing fast enough to make sure that you're uplifting everyone. And then the equalizing mechanisms are there. Possibly we need a better UPE system. It's right there, it's a good thing, but how can it be improved to make sure that we equalize more? I believe that has to happen. But that shouldn't be the reason why we don't promote the growth of our entire economy.
Ramadan, should we, with capitalism being the major ideology, do we give up on equality? Oxfam International, the entire strategy around advocacy has been focusing on highlighting this big inequality problem that's coming out of capitalism. So is that a dream? Do we give up? Do we say, let's focus on development and completely ignore this inequality?
Well, no, I don't believe we should give up. I really believe we don't need more capitalists of this nature. Capitalists who are evicting people from their land, using pounding goods to create more capital, create more wealth. I don't think that wealth is needed in this world. I believe we didn't need to move from one extreme to another extreme. The mistake we make in this world is we are comparing capitalism to communism. The communism was the extreme, where government was allocating capital. Capitalism is the extreme, where we have left the self-seeking private entrepreneur to allocate capital. Either way, these extremes are bad. There is a middle ground which I think can be explored. Recently, I was invited in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, to present a paper on countering the illusion of big ideas and building the economy from below. And when you explore things like participatory or solidarity economies, I think some people think these are just terminologies and we are debating to go back to socialism. No, it's about getting the capitalism to work for many people. And to me, I think we needed to build the economy on the principles and values of cooperation. How do we get people, organized in cooperatives, for example, to pursue goals which can bring equal benefit in the outcome? There is also the issue of self-determination and democracy. The political economy of running these economies is so critical. Like the Prof said, now we are running a democracy which is not sustainable. A democracy which is relying on these rent seekers to finance the candidates. Then after that, they get to benefit from the powers that be through getting rent. Today we are having entrepreneurs or capitalists who are spending more time in the state houses of big governments looking for rent instead of spending the time looking for market access. And I think that's not capitalism which will help us. We don't need such entrepreneurs. However much you start looking for local content, whatever, it can't work. So we shouldn't start with the grand theory, in my view. Instead, we should start with the daily practices, changing the daily practices of managing the economies. We don't need to provide an economic organization, an alternative economic organization to capitalism. Instead, in my view, we should provide a model for economic organizing. How do we organize the current economy? For example, look at Uganda. In Uganda, cartels roam freely and they die of natural causes. We have left, for example, look at how the utilities sector is working. Look at how the financial sector is working in Uganda. When you listen, many people will tell you, it's because you are risky to lend to, it's because the cost of doing business is so high. But you know, it can't be that the cost of doing business in Uganda has been high since 1994, when interest rates were comparable to what it is today. The problem is, there is a cartel running the banking system, in my view, and it has been left to go unchallenged. Because when I read that the Uganda Bankers Association has sat, I wonder, what do banks do in an association? They of course agree on how they are going to charge interest rates, on how they are going to share the market and so on. So we have to go back and revise how do we get these competition laws work, antitrust laws work, how do we detach the political power from the economic system so that we can get the capitalism to work. In my view, it's failure to manage, to regulate the economies. Prof said that today capitalism is not as bad. I really think after the crisis of 2008, okay, there has been some ruder awakening that something has to be done, but still a lot has to be done, especially in the developing world where we are just learning to get these markets in place, because in other worlds they are talking of market failure in the form of failure to regulate them. In Uganda, in our case, it is missing markets.
One thing I would say is that it's lack of knowledge or transparency in the tax system. I think these incentives are available to everyone, irrespective of nationality, color, or where you come from. But of course, there are thresholds. You must have, like at investment authority, there's a threshold you must have. There's a certain amount of capital you should have. I think it's $100,000 US. Again, the question would be how many Ugandans can raise $100,000 US as a startup capital? That would be the question. So you'll find that there's a tendency for the people who use the incentive to be foreigners, who tend to have that credit, that capital. But there are so many other opportunities. It's just that people don't know, or there are so many institutions dealing with the same thing, and a lot of information get lost. There's Uganda Securities Exchange. There's a facility for SMEs to raise capital, venture capital using equity financing. But of course, as you know, Ugandans, we don't want to open up. There are issues of governance in our companies. Our companies are family run, and we don't want people to enter into our business. Because at Uganda Securities Exchange, you will be asked to open up your books, because you are inviting other shareholders, and they must know how have you been running your books. Many people don't want that transparency. There are other free zones, but free zones, you must produce for export. So again, the question is, how many Ugandans can produce for exports? Then there are tax holidays, running up from 10 years to 25 years. We have those incentives. But again, all those things, like tax holidays, they are open to abuse. There was a youth venture fund, which was from the Ministry of Gender, which was being given to the youth. But the way they were giving it, you cannot force a capitalist. That's another thing I wanted to say. You cannot teach someone how to be a capitalist. You can't. I think it's something inborn. You just mentor them. You cannot say, you open up a business, I'll give you money. That's what they did, and it failed. We spent billions of money, billions of pounds, millions of pounds, because it was funded by DFID, but the outcomes were zero. People just had a beer and stuff like that.
Okay.
But
30 seconds. 30
yeah,
seconds.
30 seconds. We do need international capital, or FDI, foreign direct investment, for diffusion of technology and knowledge spillovers. There's some skills we don't have. He pointed out nuclear plants. I don't think any Ugandan has knowledge on how to run a nuclear plant. We will need foreigners to do this. But the issue is, do they transfer this skill? And can we retain this skill? That's what we should be fighting for.
All right, thank you. Professor, any quick responses to the questions that have come out before we open up for another round of questions?
Yes. There seems to be concern about the model of capitalism that we have adopted, defended, how we understand and define it. In principle, there is no doubt that we have said, ever since we became an independent country in 1962, that we would follow a market system and free enterprise. You are free to set up your own enterprise, generate capital and other resources, and start a business. My simple understanding of capitalism is precisely that. Now, how much capital you can mobilize? That's what many people, I think, are disappointed about. Your 100,000 shillings, which may sound like little, but Steve Jobs, who started Apple, which you're talking about, when I was an undergraduate, he was working in his father's garage. Now he's the biggest company in the world. So in that sense, that we encourage creativity, we encourage free enterprise, and however you do it, whether in your father's garage, if you don't have a garage behind your tree or whatever, you start wherever you can, but you're free to enterprise, you're free to be creative, and hopefully you'll make it. As I think Ramathan, he said maybe 95% will fail, but others will succeed. So I think the question of morality, I don't know. I think that certainly has to be law to make sure that capitalists act within the law. Otherwise, morality is something that I think we hope by law and by the church, we all act morally. Nationalism, I'm not sure I understand the basis of the question, how nationalism is related to capitalism. I think I was quoting China, but I think that we are all encouraged to be patriotic. Affordability of capital. This is a central issue.
Thank you.
And we haven't succeeded in making capital affordable. Other than perhaps us coming together and becoming shareholders of an entity in form of equity, but the moment we go to the bank, we are in trouble because the cost is too high. So it's still on the table as a question to be solved. Finally, I think already, are we a capitalist? I think we are in the principle. But we are flexible, and I think if you ask me, are we socialists? I also say yes, in principle. We are willing to accept some principles of socialism as well. We are open, we are creative, and we are pragmatic. Thank you.
Okay.